Welcome back for another edition of GrokTALK, brought to you by GrokTALK.com and Grok Media LLC. The date is May 11th, 2026, and today we're going to talk about healthcare, kind of, sort of, just a little bit. First of all, we're going to listen to some testimony from Melissa Blazek, Rebuild, New Hampshire. New Hampshire has a bill, HB 360. It would prohibit certain medical interventions in public schools. Ideally, we would like to prevent all medical interventions in public schools unless they are happening because actual medical professionals have arrived on scene to address an incident, hopefully not a serious one. But schools, public education, is a complete failure. It is incredibly expensive and produces miserable results. Why you would want that system to take over anything else, ever, especially healthcare regarding your children, is a mystery to me, but it's happening. The progressives want to put clinics in public schools, the same schools that spend $30,000 or $40,000 to graduate a child who can barely read or do math at grade level. This is not a good idea. In the interests of actual public health, New Hampshire legislators and groups like Rebuild New Hampshire have pressed forward with the idea that, you know what, if you do this, it's just another distraction from your actual mission. You shouldn't be doing those things. We're going to check out that. Plus, we're going to read through and fisk some excellent writing by a med student who has been a doctor for a while now, who gives us an inside look at the workings of medical schools in America and how broken they are because of DEI. All that and maybe a little bit more, you never know, when GrokTALK starts in less than 60 seconds. Not everyone can get up every day and look for ways to piss people off. But here at GrokTALK.com, we do that almost every day. I can't tell you how many times someone's lost their SHIT and threatened to end us. We're still here, pissing people off. It's almost like we enjoy it, and we've been doing it since 2006. That's almost 2 decades of news, politics, and opinion, and now podcasts, and we're just getting started. We believe in principles before parties and politicians. We defend free markets and individual liberty, and if that makes you mad, it makes us smile. We're like Grandma after she stopped caring what other people thought. If that sounds refreshing, you need to check us out. This is Steve McDonald for GrokTALK, and we'll keep shining the light on them for you. All right, so I should disclose that I do some work for Rebuild New Hampshire, which used to be Reopen New Hampshire. I aid and abet their mission. I guess you could put it that way. So with that out of the way, let's take a listen to what Melissa had to say in her testimony on HB 360.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, member of the committee. I'm Melissa Blazek. I'm here representing Rebuild NH. I just want to quickly answer Senator Birdsell's question. I'm not sure where you're seeing diagnostic. This is only prescriptions and surgical procedures. And if a child has a prescription, another doctor has given them a prescription, let's say for an EpiPen, right? All the school nurse say is doing is administering that prescription, okay? So they're unrelated things. At its core, this bill addresses a fundamental question. What are schools for? Schools exist to educate children. They are not hospitals. They are not clinics. They are not meant to function as full-service healthcare providers. HB 360 helps preserve that distinction by prohibiting prescriptions and surgical procedures in school-based health clinics. It does not eliminate basic care. It simply draws a reasonable boundary so that schools remain focused on education and not healthcare delivery. When we embed healthcare providers directly into schools, we fundamentally change the school environment. Students no longer are just attending math, science, and reading. They're being rooted into medical services throughout the school day. Teachers and administrators become gatekeepers to healthcare access. The nurse's office becomes a medical clinic, and the educational mission begins to blur with medical decision-making. Supporters often say that New Hampshire requires parental consent, but we have seen how easily that safeguards can fail when parents are not physically present. Forms are miscommunicated, students are pulled from class, decisions happen quickly, and when care is delivered during the school day, the natural pause that usually exists, the call home, the appointment scheduling, the drive to the doctor, disappears. That pause is not an inconvenience. It is a safeguard that ensures parents are involved in meaningful medical decisions. Federal law requires that children over the age of 12 be able to access certain services, including birth control, without parental consent. Traditionally, that still meant a child had to be driven to a doctor, schedule an appointment, and seek care outside of school. School-based health clinics remove those barriers entirely. They create unfettered access to medical interventions during the school day. We can see the dangers of this model in a troubling case from Maine. A teenage girl visited a school-based health clinic and was prescribed oral birth control without her parents' knowledge. A year later, all the girls who had been prescribed oral contraceptives were called back and told that they must choose between a birth control implant or an IUD. This particular student chose the implant. She was then instructed to continue taking the oral birth control at the same time. After school events like prom, the clinic distributed Plan B in the hallways. At this point, the minor was on 3 forms of hormonal birth control simultaneously: an implant, daily oral contraceptions, and emergency contraception, all coordinated through the school-based health clinic, all during the school day and all without her parents knowing. When she began to feel unwell, she returned to the clinic. She was diagnosed with clinical depression and prescribed Zoloft, again without parental knowledge. Layer upon layer of medical decisions were made inside the school building during school hours, outside of the awareness of her family. Now, this is not what schools should be doing. New Hampshire is currently the last state in the country to begin adopting school-based health clinics, and we currently have one that's fully functional in Somersworth. This gives us the unique opportunity to learn from what has happened elsewhere. In other states, these clinics have expanded far beyond minor care. They are prescribing birth control, providing gender counseling, coordinating puberty blockers, and offering a wide range of primary care services, all within schools. Regardless of where one stands on those services, they are a significant medical intervention. They belong in medical settings, not educational ones. Schools should not be transformed into one-stop healthcare hubs where students move from algebra class to medical consultations and prescription decisions. HB 360 preserves the proper role of schools. It allows basic services, but draws the clear line at prescriptions and surgical procedures. It ensures that when medical care becomes serious, it happens outside the school setting where parents are naturally involved. We should not be turning schools into clinics. We should keep them focused on learning. HB 360 does exactly that.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the committee?
We have a problem in public schools. They definitely need to be taking some things out because the focus is supposed to be academics, preparing children's minds for the real world. And what they tend to do is prepare human minds for the pretend world. What you're really doing is just messing with kids' heads. And I don't know why you would want to let those public schools mess with your children's heads. You certainly don't want them messing with their bodies. And it leads us into our next topic, which is public health, medicine, doctors, nurses. You know, COVID kind of did us a solid. A lot of people discovered that they lie to you. They will lie to you. Politicians can force them to lie to you. The institutions that are set up by politicians, the cartels, they will force them to lie to you, and they will lie to you. They will protect their job rather than your health. That was the lesson. It was a test, and lots of people failed up and down that food chain, from public health to private health to the political class to just about everyone, especially the media, who had absolutely no intellectual curiosity whatsoever, and in fact tried to suppress the truth every time it raised its head. Well, it's not going to get better. And even though Mr. Trump has stepped up and put some pressure on the DEI wokeness to try to peel some of that back, this story that I'm about to read to you is a warning. If you didn't trust public health before, you're probably not going to trust it when we get done. That story right after this. If you are watching this on GrokTALK.com, if you look right below this video, you will find relevant links. I tried to do this with the morning update. We want to make sure that you can go look at what we're looking at, and then you can make your own assessments, follow their links, do your own research, because it's about the debate, it's about the conversation, not just what my interpretation of it might be. So this comes to us from compactmag.com. The author is Forrest Bowler. I apologize if I screwed your name up. It's a pretty long piece, but it's well worth reading. I'm going to go through some excerpts and give you a little of my commentary. But this is kind of scary. When I applied to medical school in the midst of the pandemic and in the wake of the death of George Floyd, I had reason to think I was a competitive applicant, particularly for my state's public medical school, which favors in-state candidates with strong academic records. I didn't assume I was entitled to admission, but I thought I would get in somewhere. I didn't. So I did what failed applicants do. That's what they're told to do. I sought feedback. Eventually, I spoke with an admissions officer at one of the schools that rejected me. He told me that I was extremely qualified and had everything the school looked for in an applicant. He said he couldn't give me a concrete reason why I wasn't accepted, other than that I didn't fit the demographic the school was prioritizing and that other applicants were viewed as having traveled a longer distance to medicine. My application, he said, was evaluated through that lens. He then goes on to explain how, if you look at the MCATs, the medical admissions testing, a higher bar is set for certain candidates. So if you were to take the test and you were to get a certain grade, if you were a person of color, you would get admission. If you were white, it wasn't good enough. You had to do better. And this is true for every racial demographic. The system is set up to help people of color get into medical school. Okay, well, that's not such a bad thing, right? I'm a big fan of people with the right skills and the right learning and the right attitude having access to any occupation to which they are qualified. The problem is the system is set up to let people in and to encourage them regardless of whether or not they're qualified. When I arrived at medical school, he does eventually get in after working the system, it became clear that admissions were only the beginning. The same ideological framework that governed entry into the system shaped the culture inside it. Orientation included an entire day devoted to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We were asked and even pressed to publicly recount moments of discrimination from our lives. You mean like not being let into school even though you had high grades and were everything they wanted? No, not like that. The exercise assumed a shared framework of identity and victimhood. At one point, a student asked the DEI instructor to explain the meaning of demisexual, which was written next to the gender unicorn they were teaching us about. After a long pause, the instructor admitted she didn't know how to define it. Similar things were happening at medical schools nationwide. The same year, students in the first-year cohort at the University of Minnesota were presented with an anti-racism pledge during their white coat ceremony that went well beyond traditional professional oaths. The pledge, read aloud by the entire incoming class, included a format and acknowledgement and required students to affirm a recognition of inequities built by past and present traumas rooted in white supremacy, colonialism, the gender binary, ableism, and all forms of oppression. In 2021, the Department of Medicine at Georgetown held a Great Rounds lecture on anti-racism in medical education, in which the invited speaker framed our healthcare system is operating within a culture of white supremacy. Residents and attending physicians were given an online document outlining the features of this culture. Traits such as objectivity, perfectionism, a sense of urgency, worship of the written word, and an emphasis on measurable outcomes are labeled as manifestations of white supremacy and presented as aspects of our society that must be dismantled. This is your physical, personal health we're talking about. Be careful with doctors. In the context of medicine, one might assume that objectivity, rigorous documentation, timely decision-making, and high standards of care are central to patient safety and clinical competence rather than expressions of racism. Yet a suspicion of these principles was being instilled into future physicians. Like I just said, it's getting increasingly dangerous to deal with public health. Now think about how Secretary Kennedy and the CDC are all trying to reimagine what the government's role is in public health. We could do a lot of great things. I think they've made some progress. It's obviously a lot of pushback. They need more time, but we could definitely improve public health and get government kind of out of the way a little bit. But then that leaves you and your woke doctor to decide how things are supposed to work. you also have to realize that that woke doctor has risen through a system only because they were good at parroting DEI, all that other crap. Now, as this individual has stated as I continue reading, that sometimes you just have to play the game to get into the profession. And once you're into the profession, you're all set. Lots of college kids pretend to play along with the woke crap just to get their degree. But an increasing number of them are victims of the woke crap, become woke crap themselves, and then they project that on you. I don't think that's something you want from your doctor.
No, no, no. No, 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 no! No!
As my preclinical years unfolded, faculty members made sweeping negative statements about old white men in medicine, often pausing mid-sentence to add, "No offense," while glancing in my direction. When classmates learned that my family lives in rural Montana and that my adopted sister is Asian, one student remarked that she couldn't imagine how my sister could feel safe living around that many white people. Even scientific language became a site of moral enforcement. In anatomy, we were instructed to avoid long-established eponyms such as fallopian tube, named after Italian anatomist Gabriele Falloppio, not because they were unclear or outdated, but because they were named for historical white figures now deemed unacceptable on examinations. Points were deducted for using the wrong term. So much like the way public schools shouldn't be wasting time on things that have nothing to do with basic education, here we see medical schools wasting a crapload of time, especially given how much information is needed, how accurate you need to be a good doctor, and then to have all this crap thrown at you that you have to manage in your head and in the real world while trying to learn good medicine. It's a bad idea. In fact, it's a dangerous idea. And maybe that's the point. I know that the Marxists have marched through all the institutions, and this is just another one. But we're talking about people's health, actual physical harm that can be done not just by people who are ill-suited intellectually or lack the agility mentally to manage the profession, but to treat you. And maybe they don't want to. How does that make you feel? Feel safer now? At one point, when the classmate unintentionally misstated a peer's pronouns on a written evaluation, the result was a disciplinary process that included a formal apology and mandatory posting of his own pronouns on his school account, which was optional for everyone else. Later in our education, a senior faculty member who was a mentor to the offended student made the same mistake in front of our entire class without consequence. Medical students face powerful incentives to affirm the reigning values. He goes on to talk about a couple examples of students who said some really, really awful things about Charlie Kirk when he was assassinated. Please read the piece. Once again, it's linked below. The obvious message here is that these young adults who are in medicine are being brainwashed to be woke assholes. And again, that's fine. If you want to be a woke asshole, you are welcome to it. Do it in your free time. But now we're talking about a circumstance where it is being inculcated into their heads. It is becoming part of who they are as doctors, professionals. And that can't help but be reflected in the way they treat patients. Do you want, and I don't care, I mean, I'm sure there were lots of white doctors in the South back in the day who didn't want to touch a black patient. I get that. It's wrong. But you shouldn't teach people to hate other human beings as part of your educational process. That's just exactly what the left accuses the right of. And this is what is happening in these medical schools. The consequence of DEI policy adoption has manifested in some cases at the level of institutional performance. One of the most prominent recent examples comes from the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA, which publicly embraced aggressive DEI initiatives and race-conscious admissions practices. In the years that followed, reporting based on internal data and whistleblower accounts described a precipitous decline in student academic performance, including more than 50% of medical students failing standardized clinical exams and core subjects in family medicine, internal medicine, emergency medicine, and pediatrics. For context, the national failure rate for these same exams is roughly 5%. So Trump's Justice Department has been trying to step in to address this problem, this cultural twist that is causing people to admit people into professions for which they're ill-qualified. That includes, it should include political office, because obviously we've seen incidents in recent years where people who are wholly unqualified to be running cities or fire departments, for example, are. And the results are catastrophic. Human lives are changed forever, sometimes permanently. That's got to stop. And I guess I should insert here that the problem begins with Democrat policy, Democrat education policy. Their public schools are shit. The ones where they want those health clinics, yeah, them. Urban schools in particular. Places where the things that allowed you or helped you or encouraged you to excel are racist or white supremacy or colonialist. They literally use these terms as an excuse so that you don't get uppity about how shitty their schools are. They're not just underperforming. We've heard stories of entire classes of kids graduated who can't read at grade level. Some of them can't read at all. This is why they call learning racist, because they can't teach kids despite having obscene sums of money. So that has to be your fault, not theirs. They're not about to change. They're asking for more money. The kids are getting dumber. And then they let them into medical schools because, you know what? We feel guilty about how badly we treated them. We deliberately undereducated them in an environment that we allowed to become intolerable, a place where you can't even teach kids if you tried. So they let that happen. They then make excuses. They then blame you, and that kid is going to be your doctor. Now the Justice Department has found that UCLA violated civil rights law, but the response to outcomes like these has not been a reckoning with preparation to or admission standards, but an assertion that standardized exams and graded assessments are the problem instead of addressing deficiencies. Institutions are encouraged to mask them, relabeling objective measures of knowledge as inequitable and biased, rather than confronting what the results reveal. This impulse ultimately reached the USMLE Step 1 exam, one of the most consequential national board exams medical students must take to graduate, which was converted to pass-fail, in part to minimize racial demographic differences that exist in USMLE performance. Rather than addressing differences in academic competency, medical education chose to discard the ruler. Once again, the problem is Democrat policy. The schools they run suck. The students they churn out aren't able to learn. They can't teach themselves, and they are incapable of being taught. So the cure to that problem is to make any profession, and it's not just medicine, accept them no matter what. And the schools are all on board. It's the same white tower crap that you got at a regular university. You will be moved forward, whether you are able or not. Now, okay, great. Now, some of these people, they will catch up. They will find a way to get there. They want it bad enough, they will learn. But most of them doesn't sound like they're going to. And they don't have to be black, but they're not letting in white students because they want people of color. They need to have some balance. And as he notes earlier in the article, it's gotten so bad that if you look at demographics, the percentage of each race that is in America at any given time, white applicants to med schools are grotesquely underrepresented. Literally a fraction of their actual membership in the community. So it's not just that they want to create a balance, a reverse racism situation. They're literally just going all in on this, and they don't really care what the outcome is. Across core clinical clerkships, URIM student groups, this is underrepresented in medicine, receive lower clinical grades on average than white students. On national licensing examinations, URIM groups consistently score lower on average than white students. Beyond medical school, URIM surgical residents leave orthopedic training programs unintentionally at nearly 4 times the rate of their white counterparts, a figure that rises to more than 7 times among black residents specifically. But when these disparities reemerge, they are often cited as further evidence of systemic racism within medical education. No matter what you do at the school level, no matter who you push through, regardless of their skill set or ability, Once you get into a hospital setting, you're going to run into a different kind of racism. It's called insurance. Hospitals are businesses. If you're going to cost them obscene sums of money because you are incompetent and incapable, regardless of how you were sold or graduated or any of the rest of it, you're gone. You're going to spend all that money and time, well, maybe it's not your money, who knows, on a career for which you were not really prepared, that somebody else rammed you through because they had white guilt. And if the hospital thinks it's going to lose millions of dollars because of you, they're not going to hire you. They're going to fire you if they did. And there's no amount of woke that can make up for that. So you're basically telling these students, yes, you can. You can. We'll help. And helping is great. If you can get them to a level of educational competence that means they're not a threat to other human beings when they practice their profession, that's awesome. And I hope that happens. I hope it happens a lot. But it obviously isn't. Anyway. Disparities hidden upstream are rediscovered and amplified downstream and then misattributed to new forms of discrimination, which in turn are used to justify even more aggressive DEI interventions. Each round of correction fuels the next. The apparatus created to solve the problem continues to expand, while the role it plays in perpetuating these issues continues to be obscured. The system not only fails to deliver the equity it promises, but actively generates the outcomes that are then cited as proof of its necessity. This is important. Listen carefully. Even if some of the most explicit policies have been rolled back under the current presidential administration, it would be a mistake to conclude that the underlying apparatus has disappeared. The administrators, faculty leaders, and professional gatekeepers who built careers and institutional influence around these frameworks are still embedded in medical schools, residency programs, and accreditation bodies. In the absence of overt mandates, many institutions have simply shifted to careful language. Emails that speak of maintaining our core values, protecting our educational mission, and remaining compliant while preserving our commitments. The University of Utah has simply renamed its Office of Health, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion to the Office of Academic Culture and Community. At the Feinberg School of Medicine at Northwestern University, DEI administrators that once held positions such as Director of Diversity and Inclusion and Associate Dean of Diversity, Inclusion, and Student Support have been given new titles like Executive Director of Health Equity Initiatives and Vice Dean for Health Equity. The Excellence in Diversity Award that I won 2 years ago has been officially renamed the Excellence in Culture, Leadership, and Community Engagement Award. So this applies everywhere DEI is. And what it means is 2 years isn't enough, 4 years isn't enough, 8 years may not be enough. I don't say this too often, do I? But we need a good 16 years of no Democrats in charge of anything. We need at least that. They need to be destroyed as a party. This is destructive to human beings and the planet, believe it or not, because the same people pushing this culture are the ones offshoring emissions to pretend to be green, and they enforce, demand, and require technologies that aren't green at all. And if you've followed the history of Marxism, communism, Democrat socialism, all of which are the same thing by different names, you will know that at the point at which they actually win, all that shit goes out the window. They then rape the earth for resources because they need to. Their system spends and wastes money to such a degree that they can't possibly ever have enough. None of this is going to be a part of the world that they promise you will be a part of. Not one bit of it. It all goes out the window. The minute they have one-party rule, the minute they no longer fear opposition, it's over. But on the bright side, you will have an entire army of woke, DEI inculcated professionals who really don't have a clue how to do their job. That's it for this week. I was going to do another segment, but this one ran a little long. Thank you very much for watching. Please go read this article and share it. Everybody needs to understand what the Marxists did to the institutions and how dangerous it will be for you moving forward. Watch the morning update every day, Monday through Friday, and make sure you come back next week for another installment of GrokTALK.
GrokTALK.